Do you vote? Do you look at it as a choice or a civic duty? This past Ontario election had the lowest voter turnout in history at 43%. So, why do some Ontarians not vote? Now it's time to meet our guests and they can introduce themselves. John, can you please get us started?
Yes, thanks for having us. And my name is John Beebe, and I lead the Democratic Engagement Exchange in the Faculty of Arts at the Toronto Metropolitan University, which is formerly known as Ryerson and now is Toronto Met.
John, really nice to see you. And Seher, go ahead.
Great to be.
Hi, my name is Seher Shafiq. I'm the program manager for the Journeys to Active Citizenship project at North York Community House, and I work closely with my colleague John at Toronto Metropolitan University and also with colleagues at OCASI.
As I mentioned, voter turnout has shown signs of improvement, but some predictions for the June 2nd election are indicating a low turnout. Seher, we are in the midst of what's been called an affordability crisis. Housing, food, gas, rising inflation, all of these issues impact all of us on some level. Are you surprised that there seems to be low engagement with this election?
I'm not too surprised. I mean, if you look at the reasons that people don't vote, one of the top cited reasons is that people feel too busy. And too busy could mean a lot of things. It could also mean being really overwhelmed. I have worked with immigrants and refugees, and even in this project, Journeys to Active Citizenship, we spoke to immigrants and refugees. And there is a strong correlation between people's basic needs being met and their capacity and willingness to engage in civic and political things. So it doesn't surprise me a lot that if people are feeling like their basic needs aren't being met and they're working paycheck to paycheck and really feeling the impact of things like inflation, rising food prices, gas prices, just like overall cost of living, that very much aligns with what we know tends to happen when people's basic needs aren't being met.
And John, just to build on what Sahara was just saying, if people are too busy to engage, these are the issues that maybe can make life better for them down the road. So how do we close that circle?
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge because people, when they feel like the election matters, they will overcome those barriers and participate. But when they're feeling frustrated and overwhelmed, they may not see the connection to the issues that are being discussed in the election. And I think, we will see with this election whether people's awareness of how government impacts them.
I want to show some numbers of what voting engagement has looked like over the past few decades. This is not on the graph, but back in 1971, 71% of Ontarians voted. That number seems unattainable when you compare what's happened since. Looking at this graph spans 2 decades. What we see here is that in 1995, it was a high 63%, but by 2011 had dipped steadily down to 48%. By 2014, it had grown to 51%, and in the last election, a healthier 57%. John, when you look at the last election, it seems we're on the upswing with voter turnout. We used to look at it as a civic duty, but now we look at it maybe as a choice. Do you think maybe that's where the shift has happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think can feel genuinely frustrated with democracy responding to our biggest challenges. If you look at climate change, if you look at the issues of systemic racism, people are like, these are urgent issues and they don't feel it being changed and reflected in the world they're experiencing. And so people are genuinely frustrated. And so the challenge is, what's the solution? And how do we make sure that people's voices are heard in these elections? In the last couple of years, we've seen a change, and young people are voting at a much higher rate. And so when we see that change, then we've seen issues like climate change get on the top of the political agenda. We're seeing housing get on the top of the political agenda. And when people are responding in that way, then we can build momentum and excitement and feel like we can actually address these problems through our democracy.
I want to talk specifically about immigrant and refugee populations because that's the group that I have the most experience with. And it's really interesting because that is a group, not to lump everyone together, but that is a group that has consistently lower than average turnout, or at least lower turnout as compared to non-immigrant populations. And it's important to realize there's a lot that happens before somebody decides to vote. You have to feel a sense of belonging and trust with your fellow Canadians. There has to be community engagement before there is political engagement. We have academic research and literature that shows that people need to, again, have their basic needs met. They have to feel empowered and feel like they have the civic skills and knowledge to participate and make an informed choice. And so when we're looking at this population and we're looking at these numbers of all of the people that didn't vote, there is so much depth and nuance to those numbers, and so much richness and nuance is the word that comes to mind behind why those numbers are so low. And as part of our project, we spoke to hundreds of immigrants and refugees and staff that work with them, and we learned a lot that supplements the academic research, but lots of powerful stories for why people start to be engaged and then they encounter things like racism, discrimination, basic needs not being met, and then those barriers eventually become so big that they aren't able to fully participate. And that's part of the reason that those numbers are so low and, I guess, unacceptable, if you want to use that word.
John, I was born in a country where people are not able to vote. I read somewhere that one of the reasons why some people don't vote is they simply don't know if they can vote. Who is eligible to vote in this province?
Yeah, I mean, the great thing in Canada, for most people, it's easy to vote, right? So I grew up in a country and spent most of my life in a country just to the south of us in the United States, where voting isn't easy for everybody. And certainly not everybody has been eligible. And even to this day, not everyone is eligible. But in Canada, if you are 18 years old or older and you're a Canadian citizen, you are eligible to vote. And that can be if you're imprisoned, it doesn't matter. Anyone who is 18 or over and a Canadian citizen is eligible to vote. There's no other criteria. But I would just want to build off of something that Seher said, because she's absolutely right, of that sense of feeling of belonging. And I think that politicians aren't going to go out and seek out those people who haven't participated before. And that's where civil society organizations have a really important role to play. And that's who we've been working with in the last few elections. So we work with local libraries, we work with community centers, we work with immigrant and settlement agencies so that they can do the outreach and engagement and build a sense of belonging and build a sense of connection to those communities that aren't always represented, that aren't always heard. And so I think we all have, it's not just up to the election management bodies, it's not just up to the politicians, but it's up to all of us to build this healthy and vibrant democracy. And we do that by inviting people who haven't yet been invited in, listening to their concerns, and then connecting that to the election.
We recently talked to some people in Windsor, where voter turnout in 2018 was less than 50%, one of the lowest in the province. Jan Jagannathan traveled there, and we wanted to find out why people vote or why they don't vote. Let's take a look.
If you don't vote, you don't have a say. That's our chance to control the society we want to live in. And in other parts of the world, people are literally putting their lives on the line to vote. So it's so simple for us to do it here. It seems a shame that more people don't.
Seher, as the voters said in that clip, people around the world have to fight to vote. Do we take voting for granted in Ontario and in Canada?
That's a really big question. I don't know if it's that we take it for granted. I've been doing this work for many years, and very rarely have I come across people that are taking it for granted. Most times it's people who feel disillusioned by the system, and they feel that their voice doesn't matter. They feel that politicians don't care for them.
I think for a lot of folks, it's exactly what Seher was saying, that the issue isn't actually showing up and marking your ballot. That's pretty easy. It took an average of 10 minutes or less in the 2019 federal election. The challenge is really learning everything you need to know to feel confident you're making a well-informed decision. And that's much harder. And for those folks who were born in Canada and who may have grown up in the sort of the political milieu, they don't have that hard work to do. And so maybe it's harder for them to understand and appreciate how hard it is for somebody coming in and voting for the first time, who, very much to their credit, wants to make a well-informed decision.
We actually have a question from someone who's been watching our discussion. Wilfred, go ahead with your question. Please let the person know who the question is directed to.
This is directed to any of the panelists. In Ontario's last election, only 52% of votes helped elect an MPP. But in New Zealand, for example, in their last election, 91% of votes helped elect an MP. And as a result, they have a 82% turnout because their MMP system gives you a pretty good incentive to vote, doesn't it?
Our electoral system is definitely a source of frustration for a lot of folks because, as you suggest, we can elect people and political parties can become leaders. We have that both now provincially and federally, where we have political parties that have a majority in Parliament and a majority at Queen's Park that got, less than a third of the overall vote, but yet they have a majority, and that doesn't feel particularly democratic. So I think that can be a frustration, and I think there are some, worthy efforts to reform the system.
Speaking of reforming the system, Seher, the federal NDP is proposing lowering the voting age to 16. Party leader Jagmeet Singh has argued that, quote, there is a feeling across the world that democracy is in threat, and we're seeing the rise in some cases of fascism, the rise of or an erosion of democracy, and some examples of that. In light of that, I think there's a stronger conviction around how do we support democracy? How do we make sure our democratic systems function well and have good participation and remain vibrant, end quote. Seher, is that a reasonable argument as to why the voting age should be lowered to 16?
I think young people are much smarter than we give them credit for.
I tell my kids this all the time. John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I taught high school for many years, and the students I worked with, I wish they had a right to vote. I think it's a great idea, because obviously for folks who are 16 or 17 who don't yet eligible to vote, the decisions that are being made now are going to affect them longer than any of us.
The youngest generation, like Gen Z or whatever the generation below Gen Z is going to be called, I'm pretty sure research is showing that they are the most politically, civically engaged in history. Outside of voting, they are the most aware. They're scrolling on TikTok and all of these apps where, we make fun of TikTok a lot about how it's like dancing videos, but in reality, there is a lot of educational content that these young people are getting exposed to younger than ever before, and they are so socially and politically aware and making so many changes to their day-to-day lives, whether it's through activities like protesting, advocacy, and collective action, or in their individual lives through things like making responsible choices about what they eat, what they buy, where they, how they engage in various different issues. So I think even if voter turnout for that population might appear to be lower, it doesn't mean that they're not civically engaged. In fact, it's quite the opposite.
And John, you mentioned that you are from the United States. My husband is from the UK, and he has this false impression that he can tell me who to vote for because he can't vote. What difference would it make if permanent residents who aren't yet Canadian citizens were allowed to vote?
Yeah, I think in Canada, certainly for municipal elections, there's been some efforts to allow permanent residents to vote. Permanent residents pay taxes. Permanent residents, work. Permanent residents have their kids going to school here. They're in every way contributing to our communities. So they should have a voice in shaping their communities. And that would make a lot of sense.
We have another clip. As an Indigenous person living in Windsor, Jeffrey Menier told TVO he doesn't vote. Here's why.
Will you be voting in the June 2nd election? Why or why not?
Because I'm an Indigenous Canadian and I don't get involved in the politics of other nations. Yeah, it's not my right place to vote. I live here, but I'm not, a full citizen of Canada.
I also wanted to add this. In a recent Maclean's article, Pam Palmater wrote, in part, voting in federal and political elections is considered by political scientists to be an important act of democracy, both a right and a responsibility of citizens. The system in which First Nations find themselves, a system that has resulted in many decades of brutal colonization and genocide, is one that excludes them legally, politically, and economically. It is a bitter irony to ask First Nations to vote in a governing system premised on their ongoing oppression. John, along with our quote from Pam and the comment from Jeffrey, is it understandable that Indigenous people are conflicted when it does come to voting?
Yeah, absolutely. As that gentleman said, he lives in a nation that has its own rules and government, and the Canadian government is not part of that nation. It's a different nation. And so the question is, should he participate in this other system, this other political system, outside of the one that he feels represents him and his community? And I feel, I certainly understand being conflicted. I have heard from other Indigenous leaders who do encourage participation in the Canadian government's elections because they see it as a way of power, of gaining power. And this gets back to what we spoke about before, is when you have limited sources of power, let's use every single source of power we have to create change. But I absolutely understand, both, sentiments from Indigenous communities who've certainly not been treated well by the nation of Canada.
Finally, to you both, what's lost when people don't vote? Sahar, I'll start with you.
It's a big question. The first thing that comes to my mind is that when you don't vote, your voice is lost. Even if it's a small voice that's one vote, that voice is lost. One simple thing I've been saying this time around is, as an example, if I don't vote as a South Asian millennial woman, when StatsCan or Elections Ontario or Elections Canada looks at all of the data, I will not get counted. And if a lot of people from my community don't vote, we will not be counted. And when politicians or governments, bureaucrats, policymakers make policies, it's going to be based on that data that they have. And if I'm not represented, or many people like me are not represented, then that means that our voice is being lost and we're not being considered. And that means that we might have policies that don't address our needs. And if you don't vote, you can't really complain, because if you're not participating in the system, then you can't expect the system to prioritize you. So that's what I've been telling some people this time around who are saying that they don't feel like they want to vote this time.
It matters. It really does matter. And John, what's lost when people don't vote?
I think the wisdom that's in our communities from the variety of people who aren't participating. And it's exactly what Sahar is saying. It's the community's voice that gets lost. The truth is that the people who we elect have power over our lives. We've seen that in the pandemic. We've seen that, in policies as important as climate change, affordable housing, whatever is important to you. These are people who are going to make decisions that affect our lives. And if we aren't voting, especially as a community, someone else is going to give them that power.
John, Sahar, thank you so much for taking the time to help us understand this issue better. We really do appreciate your insights.
That chat was part of The Thread, hosted by me. And if you want to see more videos, you can look here and here. Subscribe to our channel or follow us on Instagram at TVO The Thread. See you next time.